My name is Lily Benton, and the day I made my mother sign a legal confession in front of the bank officer she thought she could manipulate, that was the day I took everything back. As she stared at the paper, hand trembling, I told her, "This is for every lie, every stolen dollar, and every night you made me sleep on the floor like I didn't matter." She signed. And I smiled. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you've ever had to fight for something that was already yours. It was a humid Thursday evening in Clearwater, and the kitchen ceiling fan did little to cut through the heaviness in the room. The table was set like any other family dinner, worn placemats, Janice's oversalted casserole, and that chipped glass pitcher that somehow survived a decade of arguments. I was halfway through my second bite when my mother said it, like she was commenting on the weather. "You'll be covering the mortgage this month, Lily, since you're still living here." I blinked, fork midair. My body froze, but not my brain. That sentence, sharp and surgical, sliced through the illusion I'd been clinging to, that this was still my home and I still had a family. Before I could find words, she was already turning to Hannah with a bright, artificial smile. "And these are yours." Janice pulled a shiny silver key ring from her pocket and dropped it into Hannah's manicured palm. The jingle of metal landing against Hannah's Cartier bracelet felt louder than thunder. My eyes snapped to the keys. Then to my sister's smug, satisfied grin. "To the apartment?" Hannah asked, as if she didn't already know. "Top floor, waterfront view, should be finished by next week. I pulled some strings to get it earlier." "Mom, you're incredible." Hannah kissed her cheek like a performance. "Drew, did you hear that?" Drew, bless him, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. His shirt was too tight around the collar, and he'd been staring at the green beans like they held the meaning of life. He mumbled, "Yeah, that's great," and gave me the briefest, most apologetic glance. My mouth was dry. I finally set my fork down, letting it clink against the plate. "Excuse me," I asked, voice low but not calm. Janice didn't look at me. She sliced into her chicken like it was nothing. "You heard me," she said flatly. "You're staying here rent-free. You can contribute now." "Rent-free? I've been buying groceries, fixing the faucet, mowing the lawn, and now," she interrupted smoothly, "you'll do the mortgage." I turned to Hannah, who was admiring her nails like she'd just won a pageant. Her heels, Louboutin, definitely new, glinted beneath the table like sharp blades. "Where's Dad?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from cracking. He'd never agree to this. That got Janice's attention. Her knife stilled, pressed against the porcelain. She looked up, smile gone, eyes like granite. "Your father's not here." "I can see that," I snapped. "Where is he?" "Not your concern," she said, as if I were some nosy neighbor and not his daughter. "Eat your dinner." I pushed my plate away. "No, not until someone tells me where my dad is, and how you're affording luxury apartments for Hannah while telling me to pay your mortgage." Janice's lips twitched, not with guilt, but with irritation. "I've worked every day since I moved back, Mom," I said, rising from my chair. "I sleep in the same room I had when I was 10. "And you're handing her keys like it's a prize ceremony," Hannah laughed softly. "Maybe if you made better choices, Lily." My stomach flipped. "Better choices," I repeated, stunned. "She's starting her life, Lily," Janice said, her voice icy with that condescending tilt only mothers can master. "You've had your chance. You didn't exactly make much of it." Drew finally spoke gently. "Janice, maybe we should just stay out of it," Janice said sharply, and he immediately shut down. I stood there, heat rising in my chest, cheeks burning, eyes threatening to betray me, but I wouldn't give them that. "You know what?" I said quietly. "This isn't about rent or apartments. This is about erasing me." Janice reached for the salt. "Don't be dramatic." "Tell me where Dad is," I said again, more firmly. No one answered. The silence at that table was louder than any scream. I sat back down slowly, never taking my eyes off Janice. The room had changed. The walls, the lights, the faces around me, they all looked familiar, but they didn't feel like home anymore. "Fine," I said, "but this isn't over." And in that moment I felt it, that shift. That split second where resentment turns into resolve. That night the quiet in the house wasn't peace, it was tension holding its breath. The couch springs groaned as I shifted, trying to find a position that didn't remind me how temporary everything felt. I dragged the scratchy throw blanket from the closet and curled up with it. But the AC vent above my head kept hissing like it was mocking me for trying to be comfortable in a place that no longer welcomed me. The ceiling fan spun slowly overhead, one of the blades slightly bent from when Dad had stood on a chair to dust it himself instead of waiting for a ladder. I stared up at it. letting my eyes go unfocused, blinking past the watery blur. He always said it didn't matter how small the task was. If something needed doing, we did it right. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen him in weeks. No goodbye, no text, just silence. I remembered sitting at this same couch 3 months ago with him beside me, his warm coffee breath mingling with the smell of solder and dust from the circuit boards he let me tinker with. He'd bring me old gadgets from the thrift store and say, "Take this apart and tell me why it broke. Then fix it." And when I did, because I always did, he'd ruffle my hair and say, "That's my bright star." I hadn't heard that phrase since the night the ambulance came. No one really said it out loud, but I knew something happened that night. Something Janice buried like it didn't matter. One morning he was here, drinking lukewarm coffee with too much sugar, and the next she just said, "He's not feeling well, don't worry." I did worry. I still do. But every time I brought it up, she'd change the subject or snap that I was being nosy. Eventually, the worry turned to frustration, and frustration turned into this slow, burning anger that stayed with me like an infection. I clutched the pillow tighter. She gave Hannah a whole apartment. A new apartment. Not a lease on a tiny starter place or a cosign on a rental. No, Janice had handed her a fresh, gleaming life wrapped in realtor ribbon. Meanwhile, I was lying on a couch with a spring poking me in the ribs and a throat full of questions no one wanted to answer. A soft creak came from the hallway. I stayed still, listening. Probably Drew going for water, or maybe Hannah drifting through the house like she owned it already. I thought about her laugh at dinner. The one that said you lost and you know it. Hannah had always been the golden one. The one who needed rescuing. Her problems were always temporary and understandable. Mine were disappointing. When I got into Georgia Tech, I was told it was too far and too expensive. When Hannah dropped out of community college, Mom paid for her to rest and reset in Paris for 2 months. Said she deserved a break after the trauma of midterms. Trauma? I had worked double shifts at a cafe during finals to afford books, and no one once told me I deserved a break. I rolled onto my side and pulled the pillow over my face, trying to muffle the frustration climbing up my throat. Dad wouldn't want this. He wouldn't stand for this. He used to say, "Hannah gets lost easily. You find your way through the dark." So where was he now? Why hadn't he called? Why was his chair at the dinner table pushed against the wall like a relic instead of a seat waiting for someone? And why did Janice look almost relieved when I asked about him? I whispered it to the dark like a secret spell. He'd never want this for me. The fan kept turning overhead, steady and indifferent. Tomorrow I'd find a way to get answers. But for now, I stared into the shadows, wide awake in the house that no longer felt like mine. A week later, I came home from the grocery store, bags biting into my forearms, to find a U-Haul in the driveway and Drew trying to back a faux marble coffee table through the front door. "Careful with the banister," I warned automatically, stepping past him. He gave me a sheepish nod. "Yeah, sorry, Janice said we could start moving stuff in today." "She did?" I asked flatly. Hannah's voice floated from the living room, sing-song sweet, "Just until the final inspection clears. It's barely 2 weeks, maybe less." I stood in the doorway, watching her direct Drew like she was a home designer on a tight deadline. Boxes labeled bathroom decor, wedding china, and shoe wall were stacked neatly around the space. "This isn't a storage unit," I muttered. Janice emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel that had my name embroidered on the edge, a Christmas gift from Dad last year. "Well, Lily, since you're not exactly contributing anything right now, I paid the last mortgage bill," I cut in. That was more than Hannah's ever done for this house. Janice's eyes narrowed like I'd insulted a guest. "And Drew are building their life. You're just here." "Here," I laughed, incredulous. "I live here." Janice crossed her arms. "Not forever, let's not pretend you've got your life together." There it was, the classic Janice jab, always dressed as tough love but never aimed at anyone but me. Drew cleared his throat awkwardly. "We'll stay out of Lily's way, just need a place to sleep and shower." "Oh, don't worry," Janice replied with a bright smile. "She can use the study." My heart dropped. The study. She waved a hand like it was perfectly reasonable. "We need the guest room, it's closer to the bathroom, and I'm not moving your father's things out of the master." I clenched the bag handles tighter. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth, "but I'm not giving up the closet in the hallway." Janice looked at me like I'd just threatened national security. "It's only a few weeks. You're lucky to even have a roof over your head." Lucky, I was lucky. to sleep on the floor like a guest in my own childhood home, to finance this house while my mother handed out apartments like party favors. Hannah sauntered over, her heels clicking confidently across the hardwood. Don't be so bitter, Lil. Not everyone's cut out for independence. That night after dinner, after I quietly washed the dishes while they laughed about countertops and open-concept kitchens, Janice handed me a throw pillow and an old blanket with the faded scent of cedar and dust. You can sleep on the rug, she said simply. Or move out. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then Hannah, leaning against the doorway with a glass of white wine and a tilted head, added, honestly, it'd be better if you disappeared altogether. She said it like a joke, like she expected me to cry or throw something so she could call me unstable, but I didn't give her the satisfaction. I took the pillow, turned, and walked down the hall. The study was cold. The rug was thin. I curled up near Dad's old bookshelf, pressed my back to the radiator, and stared at the framed photo of me winning my first robotics award. He was in the picture, smiling, hands on my shoulders like he believed I could fix anything. Now I couldn't even fix where I slept. I clutched the blanket and closed my eyes, willing the tears not to fall. But the truth burned inside me. This wasn't about inconvenience. It was punishment. They were punishing me for staying, for not failing, for not needing to be rescued like Hannah. And I was letting them. How had it come to this? How had my own mother turned my resilience into a reason to treat me like I was less? As the house went quiet, I lay there on the floor, blinking at the ceiling shadows. I didn't know the answer, but I knew one thing for sure: this couldn't go on. Not like this. On the third night of sleeping on the study rug, I didn't even pretend I was fine anymore. House was louder now. Hannah's laugh drifting down the hallway, Drew's heavy footsteps, cabinet doors slamming like punctuation marks. I lay flat on my back staring at the underside of my father's old oak desk, tracing the scratches I'd memorized as a kid. My phone glowed in my hand. I scrolled to Emily Carter's name. Emily, my best friend since 4th grade. The girl who once punched a boy for calling me a nerd and then helped me build a volcano for the science fair. We hadn't talked much lately. Life had pulled us in different directions. But my thumb hovered only a second before I typed. Are you awake? 3 dots appeared almost instantly. For you, always. What's wrong? That was it. That was all it took for my composure to crack. I didn't sugarcoat it. I'm sleeping on the floor. Mom gave Hannah my room. She wants me to pay the mortgage while she bought Hannah an apartment. Dad's gone. No one will tell me where he is. There was a pause, then my phone rang. Lily, Emily said, her voice already edged with anger. Tell me you're joking. I wish I was. You're on the floor in that house you practically maintain. Yes, silence, then firm and clear. Get out of there. It's not that simple. It is, she cut in. You deserve better than being treated like an inconvenience in your own home. I swallowed. I don't want to cause more drama. You're not causing it, they are. Her tone softened. I've got a guest room. It's small and the AC makes weird noises, but it's yours if you want it. I stared at the dim hallway beyond the study door. Hannah's laughter rang out again, followed by Janice's approving hum. I don't want to impose. You're not imposing, Emily said. You're surviving. Pack a bag, I'll send you my address again. The certainty in her voice steadied something inside me. Okay, I whispered. Good, and Lily? Yeah. I don't care what they've told you, you are not the problem. After we hung up, I moved quickly. A duffel bag, jeans, 2 sweaters, my laptop, the framed photo of Dad and me at my robotics competition. I hesitated over the bookshelf, fingers brushing the spine of his favorite engineering manual, then tucked it into the bag too. In the hallway, no one noticed me. Janice and Hannah were comparing backsplash samples at the kitchen island. Drew stood nearby holding a tape measure like he wasn't sure how he'd gotten drafted into interior politics. I'll be back for the rest later, I said calmly. Janice barely looked up. Do what you want, Hannah smirked. Don't forget your pillow. I didn't respond. I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped into the humid Florida night. The air felt different outside, less suffocating. Before getting into my car, I turned and looked at the house. The porch light flickered like it always had. The paint was peeling near the shutters. It looked smaller than I remembered. I lifted my phone and took a photo. Dad, I murmured quietly, I'm going to find out the truth. Then I got in the car and drove. Emily's apartment was across town near Clearwater Beach, a 3rd-floor unit with mismatched patio chairs and wind chimes that clinked gently in the breeze. She opened the door before I even knocked. "You look exhausted," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt like oxygen. "I am." "Well," she replied, stepping aside dramatically, "welcome to your sanctuary." The guest room was simple, a twin bed, soft gray sheets, a small desk near the window. The AC did in fact make a strange rattling sound. But it was clean, quiet, safe. I set my duffel down and sat on the bed. Emily leaned against the doorframe. "We'll figure everything out, one step at a time." For the first time in weeks, my shoulders dropped. "Thank you," I said. Outside, I could hear distant waves and the low hum of traffic. No laughter echoing down hallways. No sharp comments disguised as concern, just space. As I lay down that night, staring at a ceiling that didn't feel hostile, one thing became clear. I hadn't run away. I had stepped out of the line of fire. And from here, I could finally start fighting back. The days at Emily's place passed in a kind of quiet relief I hadn't known I needed. Mornings started with the rattle of her ancient AC unit and the smell of cinnamon coffee drifting from the kitchen. I helped out, ran errands, cooked dinner, even fixed a leaky faucet with the last of Dad's old tools I'd thrown in my duffel. It was healing, in the way that calm after a storm always feels like borrowed time. But the peace shattered one morning, exactly 7 days after I left Janice's house. I was sitting at Emily's tiny kitchen table, laptop open, halfway through a freelance gig cataloging a software inventory for a local firm. She was out walking her dog. I was sipping coffee, still in my pajama pants. My phone rang. The caller ID said Boston, MA. I stared at it for a second, unsure. I didn't know anyone in Boston. Still, something in my gut whispered, "Pick up." "Hello? Is this Lily Benton?" My spine straightened. The voice on the other end was formal, male, measured. "Yes, speaking." "My name is Howard Slade. I'm an estate attorney based in Boston. I represented your father, Mr. Frederick Benton." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" There was a pause. Then he said gently, "Miss Benton, I'm reaching out regarding the execution of your father's will." I set the mug down slowly, heat from the ceramic suddenly uncomfortable against my skin. "My father's will. Yes, I understand this may be unexpected. Your father passed a few weeks ago. I've been attempting to reach the listed next of kin, and your name is the sole beneficiary on record." I couldn't speak. My thoughts were crashing into each other. Past. I hadn't even been told he was sick, let alone that he was gone. I'm sorry," I stammered. "Are you saying my father died, and no one told me?" Another pause, heavier this time. "I had assumed you were informed," he said carefully. "According to the documents, you were listed as the sole heir to the Clearwater property, as well as the full contents of your father's savings accounts." I reached out through standard channels, but I couldn't breathe. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping the tile behind me. "My mother said he was just out of town. She never said." Howard Slade's voice remained calm, but it softened. "Miss Benton, I'm so sorry for your loss. I understand this is a lot to process, but legally the will needs to be executed. Would you be available for a virtual consultation this week?" I sat back down slowly. My hands were trembling. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I need to understand everything." We set a time. He promised to send over preliminary documents by email. I thanked him, though I barely remembered doing so. After the call ended, I sat in stunned silence, the sounds of Emily's chimes tapping gently in the breeze. My father was gone, and I had to hear it from a stranger. He hadn't just disappeared. He had died, and my mother had said nothing. No funeral, no obituary, not even a whisper. Why would she hide that from me? Why would she lie, let me believe he was alive, while she handed Hannah keys to a luxury apartment? I stared at the photo I'd set beside my bed, the one of Dad with his arm around me at the state robotics competition. He was smiling in that lopsided way he always did when he was proud. Now I understood the silence, the empty chair, the sudden shift in power. He hadn't just left. He'd been taken from me. And Janice? She buried the truth like it was a dirty family secret. But secrets don't stay buried forever. And this one? I was going to dig up all of it. 3 days later, I sat in a sunlit office across from a man in a charcoal blazer who looked like he'd never once raised his voice in his life. Howard Slade was polite, soft-spoken, and disturbingly unshaken by the explosive truth he was about to walk me through. He offered me coffee. I declined. "Thank you for coming in, Miss Benton," he said as he adjusted his glasses and opened a thick manila folder with a silver clip. I shook my head, trying to process everything. Understandable, he replied calmly. And I want to take this step by step. There's a great deal of information and some of it may be difficult to hear. I nodded. My palms were sweating. Howard pulled out a notarized copy of the will and slid it across the desk. This is your father's last will and testament. Dated 7 months ago, it was revised shortly after he was diagnosed. Diagnosed? I whispered. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He paused. He chose not to undergo aggressive treatment. His focus was on arranging his affairs. He wanted to ensure you were taken care of. I stared at the signature, Dad's looping cursive, familiar and devastating. He didn't tell me he was sick, I murmured, more to myself than anyone else. He mentioned your relationship with your mother had become strained, Howard said gently. He believed telling you directly might cause complications, so he left clear instructions with me and trusted I would contact you when the time came. And my mother? I asked, heart pounding. She knew. Howard's expression didn't change, but he slid forward another sheet of paper. She signed this acknowledgement 2 weeks before his passing. She was fully aware of the will's contents. I sat back slowly, air catching in my lungs. She knew, not only about the illness, about everything. You're telling me, I said slowly, that while I was sleeping on the floor of my own house, my mother knew my father had died, knew he'd left everything to me and said nothing. She withheld information that you had a legal right to, Howard said. And there's more. He reached for another document, a property title. The Clearwater home, he said, tapping the paper with a clean fingernail, was transferred to your name automatically upon your father's passing. It's fully paid off. He placed it in a living trust with you as sole successor. Legally, it has belonged to you since the day of his death. I blinked. No, I said, voice cracking. That's not possible. She told me I had to pay the mortgage, that I was just freeloading, that she was giving the apartment to Hannah because I hadn't earned anything. Howard gave me a measured look. Miss Benton, your mother had no legal authority to alter, manage, or collect funds against the house. In fact, she's not even listed as a trustee. She has no standing whatsoever. But the mortgage? There is no mortgage. The house was paid in full 3 years ago. I have the release papers. If your mother requested money from you for a mortgage, that would be considered misrepresentation. The room swayed a little. I gripped the arms of the chair. Howard hesitated before continuing. I also obtained a financial audit per your father's request. It seems your sister, Miss Hannah Benton, used your property as collateral in a loan application for her new apartment. I blinked. She what? Without your signature, he added, which makes it complicated and potentially illegal. I stared at him, mouth dry. They lied to me. He looked at me gently. They did, all of them. He didn't answer that. He didn't have to. I folded my arms tightly across my chest. The truth wrapped around me like a chill. I thought I had reached the bottom of this betrayal. But now I saw how deep the roots had grown. They used my name, my house, my silence, and they'd never expected I'd find out. But now that I had, this wouldn't end with polite conversations or family dinners. It would end with the truth, fully exposed. The next morning, the sun streamed through Howard's office windows like nothing was wrong in the world. It lit up the brass edge of his desk and cast long golden stripes across the contract folders between us. Nothing about the room looked like a battleground. But for me, that's exactly what it had become. All right, Howard said, his tone steady as ever. First, we'll file a claim to regain control of the Clearwater property in your name. That includes a formal cease and desist against your mother or sister acting in any capacity related to the estate. He paused and looked at me over his glasses. You do understand what this means legally? I nodded, voice quiet. It means I'm evicting my mother. His gaze softened. It means you're enforcing your rights. This property is yours. They've been living and making financial decisions as though you didn't exist. I exhaled slowly, heart thudding in my chest. It wasn't just the paperwork or legal language that made it hard. It was the fact that I could still hear Janice's voice in my head, telling me I was selfish, dramatic, ungrateful. She'd built that soundtrack so well, it played on its own now. Howard slid another document toward me. We also need to address this. It was a notice. Bold red lettering across the top. Property held pending review, loan irregularities identified. I leaned forward. This isn't my house. No, he said. This is for a high-rise unit in the Palmetto View complex, in your sister's name. He tapped the corner of the page. But the loan was processed under an asset-backed structure, using the Clearwater property as collateral. My eyebrows knitted. My house, your house. But I never signed. That's the issue, Howard said, his voice now edged with something colder. There's no legal signature from you anywhere, which means the bank either forged documents or someone else submitted them on your behalf without consent. I stared at him, throat dry. That's fraud. Yes, he said simply. It is. A silence settled between us. The word hung in the air like a gavel. I thought about Hannah's designer heels, her smug tone, the way Janice passed her the apartment keys with all the flair of a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and then I thought about the rug in the study, my duffel bag. That night I curled up like a stranger in the only home I'd ever known. I want everything documented, I said firmly. Every signature, every phone call, every transaction. Howard gave a small, approving nod. We've already begun pulling records. If there's a forgery, we'll find it. Good. I didn't say it out loud, but the resolve clicked into place like a key in a lock. They didn't just lie to me. They gambled with what my father built, what he protected for me, as if I was an obstacle to work around, not a person to be respected. No more silence. No more swallowing insults at dinner tables. No more being pushed to the floor while someone else lived in comfort upstairs. I'm going back to the house, I said quietly. Howard looked up. Are you sure? I'm not going there to argue, I said. I'm going to take back what's mine. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find out who else knew, because lies that big, they don't survive without a few helpers. It was just afternoon when we pulled into the driveway. Howard sat calmly in the passenger seat beside me, briefcase in his lap, while I gripped the wheel like I might crush it. The house looked exactly the same as I'd left it, peeling paint, a wilting hibiscus bush leaning against the porch rail, and the chipped ceramic gnome that Dad swore he hated but never let anyone throw away. Only this time the front door was wide open, and shouting spilled through it like smoke from a fire. I shot Howard a glance. He simply nodded, composed. Stay close, let me lead. We stepped out just as another shrill voice pierced the air. This is a mistake, Janice barked. We've lived here for 30 years. You don't know what you're talking about. Inside, chaos. Hannah was curled on the arm of the couch, sobbing into her hands, streaks of mascara trailing down her cheeks like war paint. Janice paced in front of her, phone in one hand, her other hand slapping her thigh with every frustrated word. Drew stood frozen near the dining room, his jaw slack, like he'd just walked into the second act of a play he didn't buy tickets for. The voice on speakerphone was male, professional, and utterly unmoved by Janice's fury. Ma'am, we're simply informing you of the lien notice issued against the Palmetto View unit due to asset discrepancies. If there is an error, your attorney can contest it through formal channels. There is no error, Janice snapped. This house was part of the loan. I submitted the equity paperwork myself, Hannah shrieked. Mom, stop, just tell them it's not true. Drew finally turned, his eyes darting from Janice to Hannah, then stopping cold on me. He blinked. Lily, I stepped fully into the room. Hi, Drew, Janice froze, the color draining from her face. Hannah's head jerked up, mascara-rimmed eyes locking on mine. What are you doing here? I didn't answer. Howard stepped forward, clearing his throat. Howard Slade. I represent Miss Benton in the matter of her late father's estate and associated property rights. We're here as a courtesy to present documentation, not to escalate. Janice's jaw tightened. I want you out of my house, she said, voice trembling. I didn't flinch. It's not your house. Howard calmly opened his briefcase, withdrawing the notarized will and the property deed. He laid them on the kitchen island like a hand of cards. This home was transferred legally into Lily Benton's name upon Mr. Benton's death, he said. All financial records confirm ownership. Mrs. Benton, you are not listed on the deed, trust, or mortgage because there is no mortgage. Drew's mouth opened. What do you mean? He asked slowly. This isn't Janice, this house isn't yours. Janice let out a laugh, sharp and unraveling. Don't be ridiculous, of course it is. I've paid the bills, raised a family here, this is my home. None of that is legally binding, Howard replied coolly. Sentimental history does not constitute ownership. Hannah stood abruptly, arms trembling. You said it was ours, you said it was fine, you said the bank would approve everything. Sweetheart, Janice said quickly, reaching for her. Let's not do this now. But Hannah pulled back, her lip quivered. You used her name, you let me sign papers with her house as collateral. Janice didn't respond. Drew turned, slow and wide-eyed. Hannah, did you know the house wasn't yours to use? I didn't know it was Lily's, she cried. Mom told me it was handled. I just signed whatever she gave me. The man on speakerphone cleared his throat. Ma'am, as I stated, our audit will continue. If we confirm the property was listed without appropriate authorization, the loan is invalid and subject to reversal. That could impact your occupancy and legal standing. Shut it off, Janice hissed, jabbing the phone. The line went dead. No one moved. I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of their carefully built fiction. But it wasn't satisfying. Not yet. This wasn't justice. It was just the truth, finally catching up. The silence that followed was a different kind of loud. Not the frantic noise of denial or raised voices, but something deeper. Like the house itself was holding its breath, unsure which part would collapse next. Howard adjusted his blazer and began to lay out the documents like clockwork, calm, precise, methodical. He pulled the notarized copy of the will from his folder and placed it on the table. Then the deed to the Clearwater property, followed by the trust paperwork. With each sheet he set down, the tension in the room thickened. As you can see, he said gently, Mr. Frederick Benton transferred full ownership of this property into his daughter Lily Benton's name via living trust. That transfer was legally processed and registered through the county office on March 2nd of this year. Janice stood stiffly behind a kitchen chair, gripping the backrest until her knuckles whitened. Her face was unreadable, but her voice wavered. I was just trying to protect what was best for the family. I turned toward her slowly. By hiding my father's death, I said, disbelief thick in my voice. By letting me believe he was still alive somewhere. By making me pay fake mortgage bills while you handed my sister an apartment bought with my name. Janice didn't look at me. She focused instead on Howard's paperwork like she might find a loophole by sheer will. You don't understand what it's like, she whispered. To lose him, to suddenly have to figure everything out. No, I said, my voice steady now, ice replacing hurt. You don't get to say that because I did lose him and I didn't even know it. Drew cleared his throat. The tension in his jaw was visible now, his usually passive expression sharpened by realization. He turned to Hannah slowly. You told me the apartment was a gift, that everything was handled. Your mom co-signed and it was all above board. Hannah shrank back slightly, her voice small. It was. He stared. Did you know the house wasn't yours to use? I didn't know it was Lily's, she blurted. Mom said it was ours, that Dad had put it in both their names and everything was already arranged. Howard cleared his throat. That is categorically false. Mr. Benton removed Mrs. Benton from all property ownership designations as part of his estate restructuring after his diagnosis. It's all here in writing. Janice didn't deny it. She just sank slowly into one of the kitchen chairs and stared at the table. You made me the villain, I said quietly, so you could keep pretending you were still in charge. Janice finally looked at me. Her eyes were rimmed with unshed tears, but I saw no apology there, just exhaustion and pride. Still, I did what I thought was right, she said. You've always been strong. Hannah needed more. And that gave you the right to rob me of my father's last words. My voice cracked. To strip me of the home he left to protect me, she didn't answer. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. Hannah's arms were folded tight against her chest now. She looked smaller somehow, less put together, more like a scared kid playing dress-up in borrowed confidence. I didn't mean for this to happen, she mumbled. You didn't mean to get caught, I corrected. Drew didn't say anything. He looked at me, then at Hannah, and the space between them stretched like something tearing. Howard gently pushed one final page forward, an affidavit to confirm my legal right to assume full control of the property. This will allow us to file immediate injunctions on any financial activity tied to this address, he said. From this moment forward, no one else may act on its behalf. I picked up the pen. Janice's eyes flinched. And for the first time, I saw what fear looked like on her face. Not loud, not angry, but silent, defeated. The sound of my pen scraping across the paper was the only thing anyone could hear. One line, then another, initials, date, done. When I placed the pen down, it felt like I'd just drawn a boundary through my entire life before this moment and after. Janice stared at the signed affidavit, her eyes flicking between the paper and me like she was watching something sacred be stolen. Then she stood. Slowly. Rigidly. Like a marionette jerked into motion by rage. You think you've won, she hissed. You think because you have some papers and a smug little lawyer you're suddenly the victim in all this. Janice, Howard started, but she rounded on me before he could finish. Your father was the one who made this mess. He didn't prepare us, he didn't consult me, he just made decisions and left me to clean it all up. You mean left you to hide it all, I said flatly. Her voice rose, shrill and brittle. I did what I had to do for this family. You, she pointed a trembling finger at me, you never sacrificed anything. You've always been so obsessed with being right, always judging, always pulling away. You couldn't just do what needed to be done, could you? My stomach clenched, but I didn't let her see it. You mean I didn't let you manipulate me, I said. I didn't fall in line while you lied and stole behind my back. You're ungrateful, she shouted. Everything I've done has been to hold this family together. You didn't hold it together, I snapped, stepping forward, voice firm. You tore it apart and taped it back in your image. Hannah whimpered, but Janice didn't even look at her. This isn't about money, Janice went on. This is about respect, something you never learned. No, Mom, I said. This is about control, yours, and how you're losing it. That was when Hannah broke. She collapsed onto the floor like a marionette with its strings cut, sobbing into her hands. Her cries were loud, ragged, unrestrained, the kind of weeping that carried years of guilt and desperation behind it. I didn't know, she choked. I didn't know it was like this, I trusted you. You told me Lily would be fine, that she had nothing, that Dad didn't leave her anything. Her voice cracked on the word Dad and she doubled over again. Drew moved instinctively toward her, but then he paused and turned to me instead. He looked tired, older. Like the weight of everything had suddenly settled on his shoulders. She's the only one telling the truth, he said softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Janice's jaw clenched. And for the first time she didn't speak. She just looked at me, her eyes wild, furious, defeated, like someone standing in the ruins of a fortress she spent decades building, only to realize it had never been hers to begin with. I felt no satisfaction. But I did feel clarity. I'm not here to humiliate you, I said, voice even. But this ends today, your control, your lies, your guilt games, I'm not afraid of you anymore. The words felt strange in my mouth, not because they weren't true but because they were. Howard gently closed his briefcase. We'll be in touch regarding the next steps. I suggest everyone retain legal counsel. Janice looked at him like he'd slapped her. But still, she said nothing. And as I stood in the center of the living room, this house that was mine in title but still echoed with betrayal, I realized something else. I didn't owe them understanding anymore, just boundaries and truth. The papers were filed within 48 hours. Howard worked fast, faster than I'd thought lawyers moved. He submitted the injunction against the fraudulent loan, flagged the forged signatures, and filed the paperwork confirming my sole ownership of the house with an expedited motion. And just like that, the weight shifted. This time in my direction. The bank called 2 days later. Howard had me on speakerphone as the representative confirmed, in his clipped corporate tone, that the loan tied to Hannah's apartment was being formally reversed due to lack of proper authorization. It was processed using unauthorized collateral, the man said, which invalidates the loan's structure. Effective immediately, the assets are decoupled from the Clearwater property. He paused. Miss Benton, he added, we sincerely regret any distress this may have caused you. I couldn't even muster a thank you. I just stared at the sunlight filtering across the floor in Emily's apartment, feeling the knot in my chest begin to loosen, thread by thread. It wasn't over, but it was starting to end. The final act came on a humid Friday afternoon, thick with Florida heat and silence. I stood in my living room, beside Howard as Janice sat stiffly at the kitchen table, the legal confession resting in front of her. She didn't look at it, just stared at the floor, lips pressed so tightly together they'd gone pale. This confirms, Howard said calmly, that you knowingly withheld legal documents from the rightful heir, submitted a false financial affidavit, and permitted misuse of property that did not belong to you. Janice said nothing. Hannah hovered in the background, eyes red and glassy, fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. She hadn't said a word since I walked in. Howard pushed the pen forward. Janice reached for it with a sharp breath. Her hand trembled just barely and she signed her name in 2 curt strokes. She shoved the paper back like it burned. The room was so quiet I could hear the ceiling fan ticking above us. Like Dad was still here, watching it all unfold. I stepped forward. This was the moment. The one I'd rehearsed in my head since the night she handed Hannah those keys. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't flinch. From now on, I said, steady and calm, we live by my rules or not at all. Hannah let out a soft, broken breath. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Okay, she whispered, you're right. Janice stood abruptly, the chair scraping behind her. She didn't speak, didn't look at me. She turned and walked down the hall with stiff shoulders, disappearing into her room. The door shut with a final, heavy click. Howard exhaled and packed his briefcase. I stood there for another minute just breathing, listening to the silence that now belonged to me. The house felt different, still bruised, but finally mine, not because the papers said so, but because I said so. 3 months later, the house breathed differently. There was no more shouting in the kitchen, no slamming of cabinet doors, no icy glares exchanged over dinner. Silence didn't feel like tension anymore, it felt like space. A clean, open room in which something new could be built. I still woke early most mornings, expecting to hear Janice's voice commanding the kitchen or accusing someone of taking the last of the coffee. But the woman who once dominated every corner of this house had gone quieter. She stayed mostly in her room, emerging only for meals or short walks on the porch. She didn't argue with me anymore. Didn't volunteer opinions about how the home should be run. She even stopped touching the thermostat, which for Janice Benton was basically a personality transplant. And I didn't fill the silence, I let it settle. The truth was, we all needed the quiet to figure out who we were without the lies. Hannah moved back into the guest room after her apartment project officially fell through. She wore flats now, cardigans. No more flashy jewelry, no dramatic entrances. She started picking up shifts at a local florist and came home smelling like eucalyptus and roses. I caught her one afternoon rearranging the photo frames in the hallway. She hesitated on a picture of Dad, then placed it at the center of the wall, right where it used to hang. Drew came by after work most evenings now, in a mechanic's uniform, grease on his hands and tired in his eyes. He didn't have much to say at first, but he always helped clean the dishes, and that meant something in this house. One Sunday I made brunch. Simple scrambled eggs, toast, strawberries from the farmer's market. The kind of meal that required no occasion but felt like an invitation to be human again. We sat at the small table. Janice was quiet, sipping her tea. Hannah picked at her food. Drew leaned against the counter. It wasn't perfect. It was tentative, but it was peace. Halfway through the meal, Hannah set down her fork and looked up at me. Her voice barely broke the stillness. Thank you, she said, for not throwing us out. I blinked. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't playing for pity. It was just raw, honest, ashamed. I met her eyes. You were lied to too, I said softly. But the difference is now you know the truth, and what you do with it, that's on you. She nodded. No dramatics, no speeches, just understanding. Later that afternoon, I passed by Janice in the hallway. She looked at me for a long second. I thought maybe she'd speak. She didn't, but she gave a small nod. It was the first sign of acknowledgement since the day she signed that confession. That was fine with me. I wasn't looking for an apology. I was building something better: boundaries, stability, control. The house didn't need to be loud to feel alive. It just needed to be safe. And for the first time in years, it was. The house doesn't feel haunted anymore. If anything, it feels honest. Every creak of the floorboards, every scratch on the walls, every sun-faded curtain tells a story that belongs to me now. Not a story of betrayal, but of rebuilding. It's been a year since I walked back into this house with Howard and claimed what was mine. Today, the study isn't where I curled up on the rug in despair. It's a bright, well-used office lined with bookshelves, potted succulents, and 2 monitors glowing with code. The nameplate on the desk reads Lily Benton, Lead Instructor, Clearwater Code Collective, a name I never thought I'd see attached to something mine. This morning, 10 girls from the neighborhood sat around the table, learning how to build their first websites. They asked thoughtful questions. They made mistakes. They laughed. And when they looked at me, they saw someone worth listening to. That's what Dad would have wanted. His picture sits on the shelf behind my chair. Same kind, crooked smile, same plaid shirt he always wore when he picked me up from school. I framed it next to a photo of our first community workshop and another of Hannah and Drew in the backyard, planting herbs in the raised garden beds we built last spring. Yes, Hannah, things aren't magically perfect between us. They probably never will be, but we talk. We take turns cooking. She watches my coding sessions sometimes with this quiet, proud look she doesn't quite know how to explain. She's still learning what responsibility looks like when it isn't handed to her. But she's trying, and that matters. Drew is steady, present. He fixed the washing machine and refused to take money for it. He brings in groceries. He listens when I talk. And Janice, she stays in her lane. She doesn't interfere. She doesn't raise her voice. Sometimes when she walks past Dad's photo, I catch something in her eyes. Not regret exactly, but memory. And that's enough for now. After the girls leave today, I make myself a cup of tea and settle into the armchair by the window. The same one Janice used to claim like a throne. Now it's just a chair, and I sit in it freely. I open my journal, navy blue leather, worn at the edges, and write the words I've waited a long time to say. Dignity is not something they give you. It's something you take back. And I did. I close the journal and smile. Not because everything is perfect, but because I'm no longer pretending it has to be. And that was the end of my story. I've always wondered, when Hannah realized the truth and chose to stay, to change instead of running away, did she do the right thing or just take the easiest path she could live with? If you've ever seen someone in your life make a choice like that, tell me in the comments. Did they earn your forgiveness? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories like mine.